Hello! You have no idea who I am, but basically this is a vlog. What's happening is that I just came back from the Godzilla movie. The new one, the 2014 one. So I just came back from the movie and I just felt like I wanted to share some things, I suppose. Just do a little rant vlog kind of thing. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, the whole vlog thing that is. But I just haven't really had anything to talk about before, so this just happens to be the first thing I record. I plan on doing more in the future, but this just happens to be the first thing I'm putting up. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm just kind of going to assume that you've seen the movie. Like, spoilers, you know, I'm not really gonna bother explaining the plot or anything. This isn't a review. This is not a recommendation or anything. This is just me talking about the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, you're probably not really gonna understand what I'm talking about. So, Cloverfield 2. It was decent. You know, it was a decent enough action flick, I suppose. The only real problem I have with it is the ending. It was really weird because Godzilla suddenly showed up and I didn't even know they were part of the same continuity, and it was really out of place. So basically, if you can't tell, the problem I have with this movie is that it did not feel like a Godzilla movie. Like, Godzilla was barely in it at all. And I think I'll get more into that whole bit. But first, I think what you need to know when it comes to this kind of movie is the background of the person talking about it. So basically, I'm not a big Godzilla fan, by no means, but I'm certainly familiar with the character and the franchise and the movies and everything. I've seen a couple of the movies. I've seen the original, and then I've seen like one or two of the reboot series from the 80s. But I know, you know, I know enough about like the rest of the movies from watching reviews or whatever, just kind of hearing about them. That's just kind of my mindset coming into this movie. I'm not a die-hard fan or anything. I thought that the old movies that I saw, they were good, you know, they were good movies. And neither am I a complete newcomer who's never even like heard of the Godzilla character before, and that might sound silly. It's like, who hasn't heard of Godzilla, but I know people who haven't, and it scares me. Anyway, I think the first place I want to start with this is with the trailers. And I didn't see much of the trailers, but I rewatched them just now, just to kind of refresh my memory, and the trailers are bullshit. The trailers are bullshit. There are plenty of shots in the trailer that don't feature into the movie at all, and vice versa. The trailers really are not representative of the movie. There are so many things that the trailer just did not cover, and it just gave a very false impression of what the movie actually is. When I saw the trailers first, and just the buzz around the movie before it was releasing, everything, I got the impression that they were going to go for something very similar to the original. Like, only Godzilla was going to be in it, because they didn't show the Cloverfield monsters at all. Like, you saw like a foot of one of them. You saw something that, well, you saw like bits connected to it, but there was no context for it. So, I mean, I had no reason to assume that there would be anything other than Godzilla in it. It seemed like they were doing a very like dark, gritty reboot or whatever. Like, not super dark and edgy or anything, but just kind of, you know, more realistic type scenario. They were doing like the dramatic news announcer and shit, if I recall correctly. And the way they showed things, it really seemed like Godzilla was the bad guy. Godzilla was just rises from the depths and goes on a rampage and causes destruction. Again, similar to the first movie. And, you know, that's what I was expecting. I think that's what a lot of people was expecting. But we got none of that. Again, if you've seen the movie, and I guess I'm assuming you have, because that's what I said before. But there's just none of that. And I guess that was kind of a letdown, you know? I'm usually not the type to really get excited about movies or anything like that. I wasn't going into it assuming that it was going to be great or anything. It's not that I had high expectations, it's just that I had different expectations, you know? It's just that the movie was not what I'd imagined it to be, you know? And it's not that it was worse than I imagined it to be necessarily, although I didn't think it was very good. It was more like, just imagine you're going into a movie expecting a comedy, and it turns out to be a horror flick, you know? You're gonna be disappointed, because that wasn't what you were expecting. I just think the trailers showed a completely different movie, you know? They really did, and Godzilla was barely in the movie. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Godzilla had about 5 minutes total screen time. Because Godzilla was barely in the movie. The movie just didn't have the right focus, you know? And not only in that it didn't focus on Godzilla, you know, or like that it focused on all the monsters instead or whatever. It's like, I'm kind of fine with that. I mean, there was kind of a formula with a lot of the older movies, where Godzilla was the hero, because Godzilla was the hero in this movie, and I guess they were trying to invoke, like, like, it seemed like a strange combination of things, because it seemed like they were trying to harken back to older movies, but they couldn't quite make up their mind, because they seemed to go for the more realistic, dark aspect of the original movie and some of the remakes. But then the general story setup and the formula followed the more lighter, the campier, like, kids movies from the 60s and 70s, right? Because those often had a formula that a new monster has appeared, it causes some havoc, Godzilla comes in and saves the day, you know? And that's what they did in this movie, except they tried to play it dark and serious, and it just didn't really mesh for me. Again, I'm going to go into this later, I have kind of a theory here. But I'm going to establish all the things that lead up to this for... But, you know, yeah, they just focused on the fucking Cloverfield monsters. So much. They were just the main focus for the most part. For like the first hour and a half of the movie, Godzilla is just underwater swimming. You see Godzilla for the first time like an hour in. Then it's like a big reveal, and even after that, it just disappears again for another 30 minutes or something, just to show up for the final climactic battle, you know? Although the battle wasn't even the climax, because the movie didn't focus at all on Godzilla, you know? The climax should have been Godzilla's triumphant fight against the Cloverfield monsters, where it's like, oh, you know, it's Godzilla, it's the main character, Godzilla should be the main character, sort of, you know? I mean, yeah, you should have a human protagonist as well, the old movies did, and I'm getting into that later. Even when it did focus on Godzilla, it barely did that, because even when it was, like, as I said, an hour in, you finally get to see the fucking thing, you know? It takes so long, and build-up is one thing, you know? Yeah, you got to have build-up. It just goes, it overstays its fucking welcome, you know? It just goes on for too long. And the defense some people might have is that, oh, you know, the less you see is scarier. It's the Jaws approach. And that's all well and good for horror movies. But this is not a horror movie. It's a monster movie. Monster movies are not horror movies, and, like, okay, yeah, I guess, like, the original Cloverfield, although there only is one Cloverfield, but I keep calling this movie Cloverfield too, so... Cloverfield kinda did, like, a monster horror movie, but that was a completely different kind of thing. That was Cloverfield. If you've seen Cloverfield, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, well, it's a completely different kind of movie. That was going for, like, a horror monster aspect. This movie wasn't. This movie was not a horror movie. And it's supposed to be giant monsters fighting each other. Fucking kaijus. Awesome battling. You know, that's what we want to see. We just want to see cool spectacles. It's not supposed to be a horror movie. Godzilla isn't supposed to be scary. As I said, Godzilla is the fucking hero of the movie. So that rule does not apply. You know, that defense is bullshit. You should see plenty of Godzilla fighting things, you know, causing destructions. That is what audiences want to see, and that's what we didn't get. But what I was saying was that whenever they finally did get into the Godzilla fights or whatever, when it was an hour in, when we finally got the confrontation between Godzilla and the Cloverfield one, the male one, right, on fucking Hawaii, it's like they finally show Godzilla, and he does the big roar, and it's like, oh, this is it, finally! And then it just cuts to, like, the day after. And the entire fighting is off-screen. And I was just, what the fuck? And they do this throughout most of the movie, and in the final battle, the final climax, even there it's like, you see the the monsters are going at each other and they like close some cargo doors and it just cuts out, and then you just see the entire battle kind of in the background. You just kind of see glimpses of Godzilla on the side all the time, you know? And even when they did show the fighting, it was like all smoky and shit. You couldn't make out anything. So even when they showed Godzilla, they didn't show Godzilla. But they had no problem showing the Cloverfield monsters. They showed the Cloverfield monsters a lot, you know? They were all over the place. So the movie certainly didn't have a problem with like showing off the monsters like that, because otherwise it might be like, they had like poor special effects or something and they didn't really want to like call attention to that. Because some movies do that. They like cover up the shortcomings by showing less of that. I mean, that's why they did the way they did in Jaws, you know? Because they couldn't make the animatronic to even look good, so they're like, show less of it. But that wasn't the case here, and this was a hugely budgeted movie, you know? This is a gigantic budget blockbuster, right? So I just don't get what they were doing. But again, I have a theory, and again, I'm coming back to that later. And I think the last thing I need to say on that subject of the movie didn't know what its main characters was that just the main characters that we had, the soldier guy, his father and his wife, they had no point, you know? They did nothing for the movie. They just, like, okay, I guess the main character, soldier guy, saved the day in the end by disarming the bomb or whatever, but it's like, why did we follow this guy? Were they trying to tell, like, some sort of everyman story? Because I could buy that. That's what Cloverfield did with the found footage and everything, but not really, because he had a relation to Godzilla via his father that was involved with the project, with the monsters and everything. So they certainly didn't take that approach. There was some sort of personal involvement there, but he didn't really contribute anything. He was military. It's like, okay, not very easy to relate to military. I don't know how it is in the States, how many people join the military there, but it's not very easy to relate with military people, okay? I mean, if it's like a war movie, I get it, but... So, I can't buy that it was the everyman route they were going for either. So I'm just terribly confused about what they were doing with the main characters. And most of them were just so underdeveloped. The wife just kind of showed up every once and again, and the son was just kind of there. And the father just kind of... Like, the father was one of the actually interesting characters, and he died in the beginning, you know? He was the only one who had any sort of, like, motivation or story or whatever. And I think what they probably should have done was just kind of remove the son character altogether, focus on that guy, not do the whole time skip thing, skipping ahead 15 years. Or maybe just skipping ahead a few less years. Focus on the dad character, I can't remember the names. Just having him still be obsessed with, like, you could have basically the same character, but just remove the son, and he would still be like obsessed with what was going on, trying to find out like what's going on, and then monsters, and it's like, and then he hangs out with the scientists and everything, because that's what I'm finally getting to, is the Asian scientist guy with his female assistant, who interacted with the admiral guy, I think it was an admiral, on the boat. Why weren't they the main characters? They were also just completely underdeveloped characters, and they just kind of showed up every once and again. Although the scientist guy did get some development. He had his watch, and like it was like, oh, this was my father's watch. He had it when Hiroshima was bombed, and there was like, oh, there's some tension between the Japanese and the Americans over nuclear weapons. Yeah, I guess that's an interesting theme, but it didn't go anywhere. Why wasn't the scientist guy the main character? He really should have been the main character. In the old movies, most of the time, those were like the main characters. Were often, I mean, yeah, in some of the movies they were like little kids in the camping movies, but a lot of times they kind of focused on scientists and whatnot, and military bigwigs trying to deal with Godzilla, you know, and it seemed like a perfect setup for that, and they barely interacted with the actual main character, with the soldier guy. Ford was his name. Like, they talked a bit early on, but then they just kind of went their separate ways. the military and the scientists just kind of showed up every once and again, and then the soldier had his own journey, and they didn't do anything with those characters. So it had this weird focus, and this is where I'm finally getting to my theory, is that it seemed like they had a problem with revisions in the script. It seems like there were a lot of things that were holdovers from early versions, and the scientists and the military and everything seemed like that. It seemed like those were supposed to be the original characters, you know? But I don't know, maybe it didn't sit well with test audience or something. Maybe they were like, why don't we have an American lead, you know? Because, yeah, there was a Japanese scientist with this British assistant, and although I guess the military were American, but maybe they were like, we need an American everyman who can represent us in this movie. I don't know, maybe it was something like that. I have no idea. But that really seemed to be the case. That really seemed to be what they were doing. That, because they just seemed like part of an earlier story. And just like the entire opening scene, pretty much. Because the opening scene is supposed to set up the movie, you know? And introduce the characters and everything. This is what they teach you in like dramatic theory or whatever it's called. But it did not do that. The opening scene did not set up anything other than that cocoon, or whatever it was, egg thing, and like, okay, yeah, that did feature into the plot, but I can barely remember how the first scene went. I have kind of a problem like remembering things from early in movies in general. I don't really... sometimes I have a hard time paying attention to a lot of the details, and it takes a long time for me to really recognize the characters and everything. But if I recall correctly, like, the very first shot was like the scientist guy with his watch, you know? And that would like show that, oh, this is going to be an important thing. It was brought up once later on, and then just, okay, that was there. And he was like at this dig site and everything, and that just didn't go anywhere. And likewise, the whole thing with Godzilla and the Cloverfield monsters and everything, it just seemed like a jumbled mess, like they were just different revisions of the scripts, just earlier draft, I don't know. It was just a mess like that. I'm not gonna say that the movie was entirely bad, though. It was... No, I mean, I guess it was a pretty decent action movie in a lot of ways. I mean, the special effects were good. The acting was fine enough. You know, all those things, all the technical things were good. But again, it just wasn't a Godzilla movie. It just didn't focus on the right thing, you know? I guess the Cloverfield monsters were fine enough, you know? If they just taken out Godzilla from it and like focused on the humans struggling against the Cloverfield monsters, that feels like the movie they were doing, and then they just put in Godzilla at the last second, you know? Godzilla just didn't feel like it belonged. That's just kind of the whole... That's the only real thing I can say against the movie like that, and that's just ultimately what it comes down to. There's not really much need for elaborating. It did not feel like Godzilla belonged in the movie. And, you know, just taking all the other things in the movie, judging them on their own merits, it was a decent enough action flick, I suppose. There were some good scenes, although there were a lot of scenes that just didn't seem important. I mean, it didn't keep my interest very well. Watching most of the movie, I was just kind of sitting through most of the scenes, just like, okay, when's this scene gonna end? You know, just not a lot happened. They were just kind of, a lot of the time they were just farting around. They were just walking every which way, and it felt like the entire movie was just build up with no payoff, you know. And through most of it, I was just sitting there like, I can't wait for Godzilla to show up any moment now. Just, you know, just next scene, Godzilla's gonna show up and they're gonna have a monster brawl and it's gonna tear down some building and it's gonna be cool. But it's... Well, no, I take back my previous statement. It wasn't a movie made entirely of build-up. It was a movie made entirely of build-up and aftermath. They skipped out all the action. And that's what I said before, you know, Godzilla showed up and it looked like they were gonna have a fight, and then they just cut to the day after, you know? The whole movie was like that. Lots of times you saw a lot of destroyed buildings and shit. There was a lot of like ruins and destruction. but you didn't really see a lot of things get destroyed. I mean, there were some buildings and whatnot tear down, but a lot of times I was just looking at it and I was like, when did this happen? When did that happen? How did it come to be like this? So there's that. I mean, I don't think I have much more to say regarding that. You know, those were my main problems with the movie. There are some other problems with the story, I guess, but I'm not really good enough at judging these things to really do any of it justice in speaking of. Like, it's plot holes and everything. I'm not very good at, like, spotting those even, so I'm not going to go into that. But there were problems with the story itself. I was gonna say some scientific inaccuracies, I would say. Like, the whole feeding on radiation thing, it just seemed kinda weird. Just kinda okay. I mean, I'm not a scientist or anything, that doesn't seem entirely plausible. But I'm like, okay, that's not really the kind of things I get hung up on. And, I mean, watching the movie, thinking about the story, I can definitely see, like, yeah, there were ways they could make the story a lot better in those regards, you know? Like, the plan the military came up with or whatever, and I can't even really remember that. I was like, oh, we're gonna lure the monsters with a nuclear bomb, and then we're going to blow it up in their faces, but oh no, they walked into this city with bomb, so we can't detonate it without killing people. I think they didn't even really say that, but I assume that was what's going on. And so instead the climax suddenly became, oh no, now we have to defuse this bomb that we set, and it was just kind of confusing. But I suck with stories. I don't know stories. So I'm not the person to really pick apart things and say, like, this is how they should have done it, or this is how it could have been done better. But it just feels like it could have been done better. Don't ask me how, I just... But yeah, ultimately, the movie was confused, you know? It just didn't know what it wanted to do, and I just don't know. I don't know what to make of this movie. But again, at the same time, I can't say that I had a horrible time watching it. No, I mean, once Godzilla and the Cloverfield monsters actually were fighting during those, like, 5 minutes during the climax, that was pretty cool, you know? Whenever the things that the movie promised to deliver actually was delivered, it was pretty cool, you know? As I said, the special effects were well made, you know? And it's certainly a spectacle movie, and that's what I wanted, you know? I went to see it in the theaters because it's a spectacle movie, and I only really see spectacle movies in the theater, you know? I don't really see much point in going to the cinema unless there's a lot of action and explosions and CGI monsters and shit. I don't know. That seems like the kind of stuff that's cool to see in the cinema. And that was what I was expecting, and once I got those things, I mean, I enjoyed it, you know? I was like, alright, Godzilla destroying shit, this is what I want to see, but there just simply wasn't enough of that. Maybe you could make, like, a fan edit of this movie. I wasn't even thinking of that, like, just the first hour of the movie even. Like, I even have a hard time remembering. I guess the movie wasn't very memorable. But, I looked at my clock about an hour in, and I was like, we're an hour into this 2-hour movie? They hadn't even, like, mentioned Godzilla yet, I think. And I was like, can't we, like, cut out this entire part? And so, yeah, maybe if someone does a fan edit and just takes the cool bits out of it, we could have a pretty cool short of maybe like 15 to 30 minutes, I don't know. So, yeah, I think that's about it. This has been a rant about this movie. Again, this is not supposed to be a review, so I'm not gonna say if I recommend it or not, because I don't know. You know, it's up to you. And as I said, I'm not sure if I liked it or not, you know? Some parts were good, some parts were bad. I don't know. The movie was confused, and it was confusing as a result, you know? I guess that is just... those are my final thoughts. That sums up the movie. I've already said that like 3 times at this point, but this time it really is the final